The Chief of Staff of Burkina Faso's armed forces just touched down in Kigali. Not Paris, not Washington, Rwanda. And if you think this is just another diplomatic handshake, you're missing the entire recalibration happening across the Sahel right now. For decades, Burkina Faso leaned on France for military training, intelligence, and air support. French special forces operated in the shadows. French advisors shaped doctrine. But that era is over. In 2022, the junta that seized power in Ouagadougou made it clear. The old partnerships weren't delivering results. Jihadist violence was escalating. Civilian casualties were mounting. Trust was collapsing. So they did what few African governments have done with such clarity. They expelled French troops and began looking elsewhere. This delegation to Rwanda isn't symbolic. It's strategic. Rwanda has built one of the most disciplined, battle-tested militaries on the continent. Its forces have deployed to Mozambique's Cabo Delgado province and turned the tide against ISIS-linked insurgents where others failed. They've operated in the Central African Republic, in South Sudan, in peacekeeping missions across multiple theaters. Kigali doesn't just talk about counterinsurgency, it executes it. And Burkina Faso knows this. What Ouagadougou is seeking is concrete. Joint operations, intelligence sharing, training programs that focus on irregular warfare, rapid response, and community engagement in conflict zones. These aren't abstract diplomatic talking points. Burkina Faso is fighting an active insurgency linked to Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. Villages in the north and east are under siege. Millions are displaced. The military is stretched thin, poorly equipped, and desperately in need of operational expertise that can adapt to the Sahel's brutal asymmetric battlefield. But here's where it gets more complex. This move toward Rwanda is part of a broader realignment. Burkina Faso, along with Mali and Niger, has distanced itself from ECOWAS, the regional bloc that once held significant sway over West African security policy. They formed the Alliance of Sahel States, a new confederation designed to coordinate defense without Western interference. They're also courting Russia. Wagner Group mercenaries, now rebranded under Africa Corps, are reportedly operating in the region. Turkish drones have been acquired. Iran has been approached. This isn't just diversification. It's a fundamental rejection of the post-colonial security architecture. So why Rwanda specifically? Because Kigali operates differently. It doesn't come with colonial baggage. It doesn't impose conditionality the way Western donors do. And critically, it doesn't publicize its failures. Rwanda's military engagements are efficient, discreet, and results-oriented. For a junta under pressure to show progress, that model is attractive. There's also a shared narrative. Both governments position themselves as revolutionary forces that rejected external dependency and rebuilt on their own terms. But this strategy carries risk. Rwanda's military prowess is undeniable, but its regional ambitions are controversial. Kigali has been accused of fueling instability in the Democratic Republic of Congo to secure minerals and extend influence. If Burkina Faso deepens ties with Rwanda, it risks inheriting those tensions, especially as the African Union and neighboring states watch closely. There's also the question of capacity. Can Rwanda, already stretched across multiple missions, provide the sustained support Burkina Faso needs without overextending? And then there's the bigger picture. What happens when a country simultaneously courts Rwanda, Russia, and Turkey while severing ties with France and keeping the United States at arm's length? You get a fragmented security landscape, one where accountability is murky, where human rights concerns get sidelined, where multiple actors with competing interests operate in the same space, and coordination becomes nearly impossible. Rwanda crushed an ISIS affiliate in Mozambique in less than a year. Now Burkina Faso wants to know exactly how they did it. This isn't about diplomacy, it's about results. And right now, Ouagadougou is looking at a blueprint that worked when everything else failed. In 2021, Mozambique's northern province of Cabo Delgado was collapsing. Jihadists linked to the Islamic State had seized entire towns, beheaded civilians, and displaced nearly 1 million people. Gas projects worth billions sat frozen. The government was losing control. Southern African forces deployed under a regional mandate, but progress was slow, uncoordinated, and bogged down by logistical failures. Then Rwanda arrived. 1,000 troops, lean, disciplined, no fanfare. Within months, the insurgents were on the run. Towns were recaptured. Displaced populations began returning. The difference wasn't just firepower, it was speed, coordination, and a willingness to engage directly in close-quarters combat that many external forces avoid. Rwandan forces didn't wait for perfect intelligence. They moved fast, adapted quickly, and operated with a level of aggression that broke the insurgency's momentum. Burkina Faso is paying attention because right now it's facing a nearly identical crisis. Jihadist groups affiliated with Al-Qaeda and ISIS control large swaths of the country's northern and eastern regions. They've displaced over 2 million people. They've killed thousands of soldiers and civilians. And despite years of support from France, the United States, and regional partners, the violence has only intensified. The military junta that took power in 2022 made a calculated decision. The old model wasn't working, so they're looking for a new one. What makes Rwanda's Mozambique intervention so compelling to Burkina Faso isn't just the tactical success, it's the operational philosophy behind it. Rwandan forces understood the terrain because they fought in similar environments. They understood the insurgency because they've studied asymmetric warfare extensively, both from their own history and from deployments across Africa. And critically, they weren't constrained by the bureaucratic red tape, risk-averse rules of engagement, or public scrutiny that often slows down Western or UN missions. There's also a cultural and political dimension that can't be ignored. African forces operating in African conflicts don't carry the colonial baggage that comes with European troops on the ground. In the Sahel, where anti-French sentiment has reached a boiling point, that matters. Rwandan soldiers in Mozambique weren't seen as occupiers or neo-colonial agents. They were seen as African partners helping another African country solve its own problem. That perception shift alone changes the political dynamics on the ground. But here's the question Burkina Faso is wrestling with. Can this model actually be replicated? Mozambique's insurgency was geographically contained to one province. The enemy was fragmented, lacked heavy weaponry, and had limited external support. The Sahel is a different beast entirely. Jihadist networks here are vast, well-funded, and deeply embedded in local communities. They control trade routes, tax populations, and have spent years building legitimacy in areas where the state has been absent. Rwanda's precision strike approach worked in Cabo Delgado, but the Sahel's conflict is more diffuse, more complex, and spread across borders that insurgents move through freely. And then there's the resource question. Rwanda deployed a relatively small, highly trained force to Mozambique because the mission was focused and the timeline was short. Burkina Faso's conflict doesn't have a clear endpoint. It's a grinding, multi-year counterinsurgency that requires sustained presence, not a rapid intervention. Can Rwanda commit to that? And if it can, what does Kigali expect in return? Military partnerships are never charity. Rwanda will want influence, access, or strategic positioning in the region. What Burkina Faso offers in exchange will shape the terms of this relationship. What's clear is that Ouagadougou isn't interested in symbolic gestures or long-term capacity-building programs that take years to show results. It wants the Mozambique playbook: fast deployment, aggressive engagement, measurable progress. Whether Rwanda can deliver that in a far more complicated theater is the test. And whether Burkina Faso can integrate that model into its own fractured military structure is another. Burkina Faso's military is requesting something very specific from Rwanda: how to kill faster, coordinate better, and stop waiting for help that isn't coming. This isn't about purchasing weapons or signing symbolic defense agreements. It's about operational transformation. The delegation that arrived in Kigali came with a clear mandate: figure out how to replicate Rwanda's counterterrorism infrastructure, absorb its training methods, and establish the kind of intelligence sharing framework that allows forces to act in real time, not days after an attack has already happened. Right now, Burkina Faso's military is losing. Not because of a lack of courage, but because of structural weaknesses that have been exposed by relentless insurgency. Coordination between units is inconsistent. Intelligence flows slowly. Response times are measured in hours when they need to be measured in minutes. And critically, there's a dependence on external partners for reconnaissance, logistics, and air support. Partners who are no longer present or no longer trusted. France used to provide that backbone. French drones tracked jihadist movements. French intelligence identified high-value targets. French helicopters extracted wounded soldiers and delivered quick reaction forces. But in 2022, that relationship collapsed. The junta government expelled French forces, accusing them of complicity in the country's deteriorating security situation. Whether that accusation was fair or not is irrelevant. The political decision was made, and the consequences are now being felt on the battlefield. The gap left behind is enormous. Burkina Faso's military doesn't have the surveillance architecture, the air mobility, or the special operations capacity to fight a modern counterinsurgency alone. And this is where Rwanda becomes critical. What Ouagadougou is seeking isn't just advice, it's a transfer of operational doctrine. How does Rwanda plan and execute joint operations across multiple provinces simultaneously? How does it train soldiers to operate in small, mobile units capable of independent decision-making? How does it build intelligence networks that actually feed actionable information to commanders in the field? These are the questions driving this partnership, and they're rooted in a brutal reality. Burkina Faso's current approach isn't working. Jihadist groups are conducting coordinated ambushes, planting improvised explosive devices along major routes, and overrunning military outposts with increasing frequency. Soldiers are dying not because they lack bravery, but because they lack the tactical edge that separates a functional counterterrorism force from one that's simply reacting to threats. Rwanda has that edge. Its military has spent decades refining rapid response protocols, close-air support integration, and intelligence-driven targeting. It's conducted joint exercises with forces across Africa and has deployed to some of the continent's most hostile environments. More importantly, it's proven that African militaries can execute high-tempo operations without relying on Western infrastructure. That's the model Traore's government wants to internalize. But operational collaboration at this level requires more than just sending officers to Rwanda for a few weeks of training. It requires embedding intelligence officers, establishing secure communication channels, and potentially deploying Rwandan advisors directly into Burkina Faso's command structures. That level of integration brings risks. It means Rwanda will have visibility into Burkina Faso's military vulnerabilities, its strategic priorities, and its internal decision-making. It also means that if this partnership deepens, Kigali will have significant influence over how Ouagadougou fights its war. And that raises a broader question. Is this partnership about building capacity, or is it about outsourcing security? If Burkina Faso becomes dependent on Rwandan intelligence and Rwandan operational planning, does it actually gain sovereignty, or does it simply trade one form of dependence for another? There's also the issue of sustainability. Joint exercises and advanced training programs require resources, funding, equipment, and time. Burkina Faso's economy is under strain. Its military budget is stretched. If Rwanda is providing this support, what does it expect in return? Access to mineral resources? Political alignment on regional issues? A foothold in West Africa that extends Kigali's influence beyond its traditional sphere? What's certain is that Traore's government has made a calculation. The cost of maintaining the status quo is higher than the cost of this partnership. The insurgency isn't slowing down. The population is losing faith. And the old alliances aren't coming back. Burkina Faso just made a statement without saying a word. Africa will secure Africa. And the continent's most effective military is now being consulted on how to make that real. This visit to Kigali isn't just about counterterrorism tactics or intelligence frameworks. It's ideological. It's a public rejection of the idea that African security problems require European or American solutions. For decades, that assumption shaped everything: who provided the training, who supplied the equipment, who defined the threat, and who decided the response. That era is being actively dismantled, and Burkina Faso's outreach to Rwanda is one of the clearest examples of what comes next. The concept of African solutions to African problems has been repeated so often in diplomatic circles that it risks becoming hollow. But when a military delegation from Ouagadougou lands in Kigali to study how Rwanda defeated an ISIS affiliate in Mozambique, the phrase takes on operational meaning. This isn't rhetorical. It's a government saying, "We believe African militaries understand African conflicts better than external powers ever will. And we're going to prove it." There's a logic to this. Western militaries train for conventional warfare, precision strikes, and technology-dependent operations. They deploy with air superiority, satellite intelligence, and supply chains that stretch across continents. But the Sahel doesn't offer those conditions. It's a region where insurgents blend into civilian populations, where borders are porous and poorly monitored, where state presence is weak or non-existent, and where cultural and linguistic knowledge often matters more than firepower. African forces, particularly those with recent combat experience in similar environments, understand these realities instinctively. Rwanda has proven this. In Mozambique, it didn't wait for perfect intelligence or risk assessments. It moved aggressively, engaged directly, and adapted in real time. Its soldiers spoke Portuguese, understood the regional dynamics, and operated without the political constraints that often slow down Western or UN missions. The result was one of the most successful counterinsurgency operations in recent African history. And now Burkina Faso wants to replicate that approach, not by importing foreign advisors, but by building partnerships with African countries that have already done what it's trying to do. This is where the stakes become clear. If this model works, if Rwanda can transfer its operational expertise to Burkina Faso and produce tangible results, it validates an entirely different security architecture for the continent. One that doesn't rely on France, the United States, or the United Nations. One where African militaries coordinate directly, share intelligence across borders, and deploy to each other's conflicts without waiting for external approval. That's a fundamental shift in how African security is structured. But there are complications. The phrase African solutions can mask serious accountability issues. When Western forces deploy, they're subject to parliamentary oversight, media scrutiny, and international law. When African militaries operate bilaterally, those mechanisms are often weaker or absent entirely. Rwanda's involvement in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example, has been accused of fueling instability and resource extraction under the guise of security assistance. If Burkina Faso deepens its partnership with Kigali, does it inherit those same questions? There's also the issue of capacity. Rwanda's military is highly capable, but it's not infinite. It's already deployed in multiple theaters, and its resources are finite. If Burkina Faso, along with other Sahel states, begins requesting similar support, can Rwanda sustain that level of engagement? And if it can't, does this model of African-led security actually hold up under pressure? Or does it become another form of dependency, just with a different capital city at the center? Then there's the geopolitical layer. Western governments are watching this realignment closely. They've invested billions in training African militaries, and they're now being sidelined. Some will interpret this as a natural evolution toward sovereignty. Others will see it as an opening for competitors, Russia, China, Turkey, to expand influence in regions where the West once dominated. The question isn't whether Africa should lead its own security. It should. The question is whether this transition creates new forms of stability or simply new forms of fragmentation. What's undeniable is that Burkina Faso is no longer waiting for permission. It's building the alliances it believes will work. And if those alliances succeed, the entire security landscape of the Sahel, and potentially the continent, will be rewritten. The test isn't ideological. It's operational. And the results will speak louder than any slogan ever could.